and welcome back to Cut Loose. And if you're new here, my name's Martin, and this is the channel where we aim to tell tales of adventures of life after work. Now, this next instalment from the Wicken Fen playlist is all about woodlands, or carr, which is wet woodland. It was recorded between March and June in 2022. Now, the woodland at Wicken Fen is a mix of sort of plantations and naturally succeeded woodland. Some of it is managed and some is left to develop naturally. So I hope you enjoy it all. Well, this is probably phase 2 of my mini tour of Wicken Fen. Unless of course I've stitched them all together, in which case this is still the same video, but anyway, we'll see how that goes. This is the learning area, also known as the education area, and it's where hitherto we would have utilised it by showing lots of school kids all about ecology and Wicken Fen, and there's a bit of pond dipping and rolling logs and looking for invertebrates and so on. But the interest for me, as we go just this way, we're entering St Edmund's Fen. Now, St Edmund's Fen is pretty much, I wouldn't say identical, but pretty similar to the Sedge Fen and Verrall's Fen, in that it is based on peat. It is varying depths of peat, but what has happened here is that the management of the fen, which ceased at the towards the end of the 19th century, was never resumed as it was on Verrall's Fen and Sedge Fen. Incidentally, these little poles here are part of the ringing group's activities. They have what they call a constant effort, or a continuous effort ringing program here. That effort, that ringing activity, has been going on here for well over 50 years. It's supposedly the longest running continual standardised session running in the country, but that's another story. So this is St Edmund's Fen. It's based on peat, and as you can possibly make out just here, there's a lot of sedge. That is Cladium moriscus. If you watch the video about the boardwalk, and through there you can see a lot more sedge interspersed with bushes and all this scrub. And now, what I may not have explained in the previous video around the boardwalk was what happens when you stop managing habitats like this, a fen like this. Well, it's right in front of you here. All of this scrub starts to grow up. The process is called natural succession, where you go from, in effect, open water, a pond, a lake, and as the vegetation that grows there slowly sinks to the bottom, it forms a sort of peaty mass at the bottom of the water. That peat gets deeper and deeper and deeper until you reach the stage where we probably are here now. And as you can see through here, look, there is a lot of water, but the ground is very close to the surface, so the inundation is only for part of the year. And because of that, you perhaps can't make it out, there's a lot of waterlogging in these trees, but because the land, the soil is only inundated for part of the year, trees can start to get established. and the sort of trees that grow are the ones that like wet conditions, such as here with willow. Also, if it's slightly drier, you've got silver birch, which is, can't make the silver birch, there's silver birch in there in front of the camera. Things like buckthorn, alder buckthorn, blackthorn. There's some weird white poplars here, which I think somebody must have planted those. There's the silver birch, if I can. There we are, there's a silver birch just there, or a alder birch, one of the two. These trees start to grow, and eventually you end up with a situation where the land has dried out pretty much, and it has become woodland. And that's a process that will continue almost uninterrupted unless there is some sort of human intervention. And when I say human intervention, unless somebody comes along and cuts this vegetation, so the sedge in this case, or the hay, or whatever it might be, periodically, that then stops these little buggers, these trees, starting to grow, which then turn into this, which is pretty humongous. And obviously they take up an awful lot of water, but as you can see through there's lots of fairly small trees that are turning into fairly big trees, and they're getting that drying process established. So this is what's happened on St Edmunds. The management has stopped, and it's virtually now turned into secondary woodland. It's a valuable habitat in its own right because, as you can see, it's waterlogged, and wet woodland is often referred to as carr, C-A-R-R, and it is a really scarce habitat in the UK now. It's all been drained, and those what would be referred to as derelict pieces of land have now been drained and defarmed, or houses built on them, or whatever's happening. And these habitats are being lost, but they are fantastic habitats, and we're quite pleased to have St Edmunds here. And you could say, well, why don't you clear the scrub and turn it into an open fen such as the sedge fen? But I think we'd be missing something if we did that. It's unique, or it's not unique, but it's quite scarce. It gives us something that we haven't otherwise got at Wicken, or there's not a lot of at Wicken, and it's quite a sizable area, so it's got a lot of ecological value. There's a little bit of watery sunshine this morning. We're now in, well, tomorrow's March, so spring's on the way. I've heard various, over the weekend, this is a Monday, various birds singing, dunnocks, robins, great tits. There's a lot of early season activity. Song thrushes were singing at home, so spring's on the way. There's no new buds just yet, but I reckon before the end of March we'll have migrant warblers, or some migrant warbler species, singing away in here. Absolutely love this because it's nice and wet. Really good for insects, really good for invertebrates. So it's a great place to nest because you don't have to go miles and miles to find food, especially as a small bird just flown all the way from Africa. It likes to have its food on hand. And one of the fascinating things about, to me anyway, about these sorts of habitats and these trees is that these branches and trees all blow over. So this one here, if you trace it all the way back, you can see the stem, and it doesn't stop there, it goes along here all the way to this point here. So this is another willow, and what happens is the trees blow over, fall over, their roots are waterlogged, So there's another one here. Look, this is split apart and it's grown along there, but it doesn't die. It blows over, but then it keeps growing, and I don't know if you can, yes, you can make that one out there. You can see where the stem has clearly blown over from way in there, buried itself in the peat, and then these are all new stems that have grown off it. And what will happen, and the one behind it is similar, what will happen is they'll grow to 20-30 feet maybe, get a bit too heavy for the roots, topple over, and the same thing will happen. They'll start sending out shoots, and Willow's brilliant for doing that. You can get willow, what looks like a little grove of willow, but when you actually trace the stem back, it's all the same tree, and it comes all from the same original root ball. But come springtime, when those little warblers that I talked about all get back, the black caps, the common white throats, the sedge warblers, the reed warblers, the willow warblers, this, well, maybe not the reed warblers and sedge warblers, but this is fantastic for them. Reed warblers and sedge warblers like more open reed and sedgy areas. They'll feed in areas like this, but they like to nest in softer vegetation rather than woody vegetation. But you could say it looks a real mess, but actually it's fantastic. There's brilliant cover in there, and it's a bit bare at the moment, but in a few weeks' time, when all the leaves are coming out, it'll be that vibrant, verdant, sort of light green, fresh growth. Look fantastic. Now, this is actually a really good example. What we're looking at here is the root ball of quite a large willow that blew over maybe a couple of years ago. This one actually split in half, because there goes the other section away off into that thick stuff. But if you look just here on the stem, on the trunk, you can see all this green growth. That's new growth that's probably been put up in the last, I don't know, 12 months. And if we follow this trunk just along here a ways, just zoom out a little bit, in amongst this ivy, I'm not sure if it's going to focus on it, but you can see all of these thin stems here have all come off, and right in front of us here. These have all come off that trunk that is actually not quite laying on the ground, but laying on the ground sufficiently. And if we get down here, you might be able to see there's some fresh growth coming out from underneath it, all attached to the trunk, and continue along here. The trunk's still down there. All along here there's all this new growth, and as the parts of the trunk slowly sort of disappear, incidentally, where this ivy is, there's a browse line there. There's a lot of deer on the site, on the reserve, and that you can see where it turns from brown to green. That's as high as the deer can reach. Everything else below there, all that brown stuff, they've browsed all the leaves off. There's a little bit of new growth arriving. If I can get in close enough, you can see there's a few little shoots have started to grow again. But I suspect they'll be along there, and you can see that line. If I get down here, you can see that line all the way along there, and that's the browse line, and the deer can't reach above that. But this tree, we're almost at the end of it now. There's a few little wispy bits of the original tree left just here, but way back there you can just make them out. is all the new growth, and not all that new growth has established itself since the tree fell over and split apart. So far from causing any problem, it's probably invigorated it. And the tree, incidentally, is another willow. Now then, leaping on a month or so, things have really come alive. The birds are singing, and the bushes and trees look a lot more impenetrable now they're full of leaves. Now, following on from St Edmund's Fen, where the woodland there is what we call sort of secondary woodland, it's regenerated naturally. We find this area, which is an area of plantation, where the trees were planted. And unlike St Edmund's Fen, which is left basically to its own devices, this area is managed. Now then, as you can see, if you look deep into those trees, because these trees were all planted, they are quite naturally all of a similar age, and if they're all of a similar age, they're all of a similar size. In a woodland, this isn't the best thing for the wildlife. Now, to introduce some diversity to the woodland structure, we do a little bit of intervention, and this is called coppicing. I shall cover coppicing in a section about the management of the nature reserve, but coppicing really is to let light into the woodland, which helps the insects, the butterflies, the birds, the flowers in the woodland to grow. Now, not everything in the woodland is rosy, so to speak. You might be able to make out some rather skeletal looking trees in the distance here. They're suffering from ash dieback. But for every ash that dies off on the fen, another fen species gets a chance to grow and thrive. As those trees fall over, they let light into the woodland, and as with the coppicing, that light promotes new growth. So, there you are then, that's Wicken Fen's Woodlands. If you've enjoyed this, and you aren't already, please subscribe. Give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to ding that bell if you want notifications of next programmes. Thanks a lot, bye bye.